A recent Gallup poll found that 44% of Americans support the Affordable Care Act, commonly referred to as Obamacare, while 51% disapprove of it. The number of uninsured Americans has dropped since enactment of this law, but despite this success, health insurers are concerned about Obamacare's financial sustainability, and Americans are experiencing dramatic increases in health insurance premiums. How would you improve health care? This goes to you first, Congressman Walls.
Well, first of all, set the stage for this. Up before 2010, we had well over 35 million Americans uninsured. We paid twice as much as any other industrialized nation, and yet got results that were about 37th, right behind Latvia, in the major health outcomes. The major cause of personal bankruptcies was healthcare bills. Most Americans' insurance had a lifetime cap on it. You could be kicked off for pre-existing conditions. If you were a woman, that you paid more, and very few of them paid for preventative health care, like mammogram screenings and things like that. Your children were left off your insurance the minute they left the house. So the Mayo Clinic made the case that the current system in 2010 was unsustainable. So an attempt was made to use market forces and to try and move forward to make sure that we can do better than that. And the case that you hear on the ACA, and an example in this, most people get their insurance from employer-sponsored plans, where they split a percentage of that. Those plans, over the 6 years that the ACA has been in effect, have seen an average increase this year of 3.2%. Prior to that time, they were averaging between 14 and 18% per year. Now, that is not to say that everything was fixed in this. The individual marketplace that you see these rates coming up, about 4 to 5% of your neighbors fall into that category where they buy on the individual market. Those plans before were basically gift certificates. They did nothing for you if you had them, and they had about a 40% turnover rate. Well, now insurers are required to make sure they provide preventative maintenance, they provide neonatal, all of the things that you want to see in good health care. Well, in rural areas like southern Minnesota, the provider network is very narrow, the number of doctors to try and get there. So what you end up seeing is the marketplace of where those folks were coming in, they saw people with more healthcare issues. We see higher costs because we're at a very innovative place with Mayo Clinic and others, and they simply made a business decision. When they first came in, they set the rates low, and they said, we're going to step back out of this. Now, what's happened in Congress is we have had 70 votes, 65, to repeal the ACA. We keep being promised that there is another plan to come in, something more than just having Louisiana sell you your health insurance or something, or health savings plans, which can work, but they're going to be a small piece of it, and healthcare economists say it won't have anything to do with it. These are all ideas that have been floated before, but nothing is ever put forward. So it's a repeal. Now keep in mind what repeal will mean. Repeal will mean those 26 million people that now have insurance will all leave. Your children that cannot stay on until they're 26, there will be a lifetime cap again. There will be no pre-existing conditions. They will put those back in, and we will be back in the boat of the unsustainability. What I have encouraged and asked for is, why are we not taking votes to improve? And on the 5 occasions that they've offered things that improve upon it, I voted for those to try and move those forward. This same debate happened with Medicare. Had we not improved Medicare, would the solution be repeal Medicare or improve Medicare like we did? And the ACA falls in that same category.
Thank you, Congressman Walls. I'm sure there'll be plenty of time for rebuttals on this one. Mr. Hagedorn.
I think I've seen a new low in politics where that was the worst vote he'll ever cast as long as he serves in Congress, Obamacare. And he literally blamed the Mayo Clinic for his vote rather than step up and take ownership himself. I don't think the Mayo Clinic, when they said it was not sustainable, I don't think they intended to have 25 to 50,000 pages of regulations to rain down on doctors and hospitals and insurance companies. Somehow I don't think that was the fix they were looking for in 2009 and 2010. I don't think they were looking to move millions of people from private insurance to government subsidized insurance, which reimburses doctors and hospitals at 30 or 35 cents on the dollar. I have a sneaking suspicion that that wasn't the Mayo Clinic's intention at that time. As far as the scare stories about, oh no, if we do any changes here, we're going to go back to when nobody has anything. The one thing the congressman is a little bit disingenuous with you about, the state of Minnesota didn't need this. The state of Minnesota had a pretty darn good plan that was working for the people in Minnesota. 90-something% of the people in Minnesota already had health insurance. We had ways to deal with people with pre-existing conditions or people with very expensive medical needs. As a matter of fact, I learned some of these things just a couple of weeks ago here in Mankato when we held a town hall meeting on health care. And we had insurance people in, consumers. There were even a couple of Congressman Walls' supporters. We had a nice talk, and it was an excellent opportunity to engage on the issue. I would let you know that of the two people here at this debate tonight, only one of us in the last 7 years has held a town hall meeting on the Affordable Care Act or health insurance, and that's me. The congressman has avoided the issue, run away from the issue, and then he even wants to blame the Mayo Clinic and others for his vote. But we'll have some rebuttals back and forth, and we'll get into this, and I'll share with you my free market reforms.
Thank you, Mr. Hagedorn. 1 minute rebuttal, Congressman Walls.
Well, first of all, we're 50 states, and there's an inequality across the nation in many things, but we're in this together. Our strength comes out of trying to make sure that we're solving problems that don't pass the problem from one place to another, and that I think Minnesota does have many good ideas. That's why we incorporated many of those things into the reforms that were put forward. But again, I go back to the point that you're going to hear proposals that are out there across state lines, insurance sales or whatever. Well, you can do that in some place anyway. The idea was that was propagated back in the 80s and 90s as a way to states like Minnesota that did have good health care regulations that said if you offer health care in Minnesota, you're going to provide mammograms. And so what they want you to do is go to Louisiana where they wouldn't offer those things, and then you could buy that insurance and you wouldn't have those safeguards in there. Insurance that doesn't cover the things necessary is not insurance. And so the reforms went into that. But I'll be the first to tell you that Dave Durnberg was exactly right. These are the first steps. There's a whole multitude of things that we're doing because healthcare, it shouldn't be just about the insurance. People need it to protect their livelihood. They need it to make sure they're able to get the care for their children, they're able to plan for the future. But it's about healthcare too. And the state of Minnesota's taken some bold initiatives where of all the states, Minnesota has reduced the obesity rate by more than any other state. Those things will have direct impacts, and the ACA has had a bend curve to the cost of health care the first time since the implementation of Medicare. Those things are facts. So the critiques of the ACA and pointing out problems, some people are really good at pointing out the problems. The issue is how are you going to, as part of a deliberative body, because you are not running for Emperor of the United States, you're not running to wave a magic wand, you're running to work with people to find real solutions to make sure that people are able to purchase in a fair way health care. And again, think about this. There's two issues at fact with health care. It's both a moral issue, because I think this question should get asked, whether you think health care is a human right or whether you think health care is a privilege that you're able to get. You need to decide that in your mind, because that will determine which direction you go in on where you're going. And then how do we best deliver it in a way that makes economic sense, that allows the people involved in this? And I would say, again, when the insurance companies tell you, I don't want to go back to a time when they're making the decisions, or the manufacturer of EpiPen decides to jack up prices 4,000% on that. There's got to be safeguards in there for the consumer to make sure that this works right. Because, again, when you're being told that the insurance company can't make it work, and yet the CEO makes $56 million a year, we have to have an honest discussion in this country. How are we going to deliver health care to our citizens? Because, again, it's the personal side, but our employers count on healthy people who don't miss work and their kids don't get sick because they're getting taken care of, so that they can contribute to the economy. That just makes good sense.
Thank you, Congressman Walls. Mr. Hagedorn, how would you improve health care?
Well, I just heard a lot of stuff. I didn't hear any solutions. I said he had some ideas, but Obamacare has been in play now for over 3 years, and I haven't seen anything come out of him. You know, Congressman just admitted that he took a vote for the good of the Democrat Party. He voted for the bill to find out what was in the bill, like Nancy Pelosi was commanding people. And it wasn't good for his constituents, but he thought it was good for the country. I don't know. If you're a representative of southern Minnesota, I think you have to represent the people. Now, when he cast that vote 7 years ago or so, he made some promises to you that he didn't keep, and he hasn't come back and addressed those promises. He promised that if you liked your current doctor, you could keep your current doctor. Well, that's not the truth. Thousands of people across southern Minnesota have lost their doctor-patient relationship with sometimes Mayo Clinic physicians. Darian over in La Center, an insurance agent, he has his own problem with insurance. He said this time this choice is going to be between either being in the Mayo plan to have access to that clinic or with his local doctor and hospitals. He doesn't know what he's going to do. Doesn't sound like he really can keep his doctor if he wants to keep his doctor. Then the second promise was if you liked your current health insurance plan, you could keep your current health insurance plan. No, you can't. Here's a letter from Blue Cross Blue Shield to Mark Fitzsimmons, a local farmer. Canceled. Blue Cross Blue Shield canceled. He's got to go find a new plan, along with 104,000 other Minnesota families. That's on top of thousands upon thousands of families who have been canceled 2 or 3 years in a row. Then he promised, well, if you're going to save about $2,500 a year on your health care costs. Really? Talk to Mary and Greg over in Sleepy Eye. Talk to Julene in Fairmont. Talk to others. They're paying $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 for insurance premiums that are virtually worthless because the deductibles are so high they never get there. It doesn't sound like they're saving money. They'd probably be ecstatic if they only had to pay $2,500 more rather than be promised a big savings. And lastly, the biggest lie of them all. Congressman Walls said if he voted for Obamacare, he would live under it just like you. Well, the congressman was asked about this in Rochester last month, and he promised the resident over there that he'd get back and talk to him about how much he pays for health insurance and what his deal is. He never did. We've done some digging to the best of our accounts. This is the deal. He and his wife and family make about $200,000, $250,000 a year. They receive a fat 75% subsidy from the U.S. taxpayers for their health insurance. His premiums are roughly $500 a month, with a deductible of $350 for himself and $700 for his entire family. That doesn't sound like he's living under Obamacare just like you. It sounds like there's one set of rules for Tim Walz and his family on Obamacare and another for everyone else. And that's the stuff we need to end in Washington, D.C.
Well, let's clarify that because this is where Mr. Hagedorn and I have something in common. Mr. Hagedorn and his family, he spent his entire adult life on the federal health insurance program that many of you are federal postal service workers here, and some of those folks spent their entire career on. Not a word about that while we're on it, but fast forward. In the ACA, it is untrue that we kept the federal health insurance program. We're on the DC exchange, where because it's a different place than southern Minnesota, there is a lot of competition. There are 172 plans to choose from, and you can go through. And like millions of Americans, just like when I was teaching at Mankato West High School, my employer paid a portion of the premium, and I paid a portion of the premium. That's how most of us are able to get that. I can go through and pick the premiums depending on, I've got a 10-year-old who gets to the emergency room for a broken arm, falling off the swing, or those types of things. You can adjust it. That is a marketplace that is working the way it's supposed to. And if you take a look at, again, the healthcare and the percentage of where it's at to where we were teaching at Mankato West High School, the premium's actually a little higher from the ones we had. We would have a little better coverage with the negotiated price when I was teaching at Mankato West High School. But what you hear is of someone who lived an entire career in D.C., had that health care insurance, and now makes the case that the rest of the people who were added to it shouldn't be able to get health care insurance. So I do not make any apology for adding millions of people to be able to have health care. I do not make any apology for getting rid of pre-existing conditions and lifetime caps. I do not make any apologies for the first time we've seen in a long time holding insurance companies more accountable to how they go about spending and investing their money. And again, you're not going to hear me say we don't need to make improvements, just like every piece of legislation. There's a favorite quote that I had. There was a quote by a prominent Republican during healthcare reform that said, if you allow this bill to pass, you can say goodbye to America and you can wake up to socialism and you won't recognize the country. That was then Governor of California, Ronald Reagan, talking about Medicare. Fast forward to then President Reagan, working with Medicare, working with Tip O'Neill and the Democrats to improve upon Medicare, to make it the program that it is that so many seniors count on, and to move it forward. It did not do those things. You sat here 2 years ago and heard the economy was going to collapse, jobs would go under, and we'd be at 10% unemployment for this. That did not happen, but it doesn't mean there aren't improvements, and it doesn't mean that there aren't families out there that are in this individual market that are in an untenable situation. Many of these things can be done back to the states, and the state of Minnesota has tried it, but the same thing. The gridlock, the attempt at a special session, and nothing. Because the first part of ACA was to set the fundamentals. Phase 2 was to turn it back in many cases to the states and to those free market principles to see if they could get there. We're going to find, like many things, some of them are not going to work, then we should go back at it. But this idea, thank goodness we didn't make the decision to scrap Medicare when we had its first problems. Thank goodness we continued to move forward on this, and the ACA falls in that same boat.
Okay, we're going to move on here. It's obviously, it's an issue we could talk about all night. Let's move on. We got 4, 5, 6 more questions here that we need to get to.
Let me tell you something about where we were with him on Obamacare. No solutions, folks. No solutions. He's been in office 10 years. It's been 7 since he voted for it, 3 or so since it's been in action. Where's his bill? Where's his bill to fix it? Where's his bill to make the changes? We should have competition across state lines to put the downward pressure. We should have health savings accounts expanded because that creates situations where people shop, they hold their own money, they're rewarded for healthy living. We should have pools for people with pre-existing conditions. We should have tort reform. We should have direct tax credits to people so they can have portable benefits. And we can do all this without a top-down Washington approach, which is dramatically hurting the people.